Sephiroth is one of the most famous video game villains of all time. If you are at all familiar with the video game industry, even if you have never actually played a Final Fantasy game in your life, you have at least heard that name, Sephiroth. And since his original introduction in Final Fantasy VII, the character of Sephiroth has appeared in a ton of expanded universe materials. Sequels and prequels and spin-offs and novels and films, including this new trilogy of remakes. And with each new appearance, the way his character has been written has changed in both big and small ways. In this video, what I want to do is to return to the beginning, back to the year 1997, back to the PlayStation 1, back to the blocky, blurry, low-resolution, polygonal original release of Final Fantasy VII. I want to go back to that first game and examine how Sephiroth was originally written, how he was first introduced to players, to figure out what it is about his character that so impressed audiences at the time, why his character has become popular enough to keep bringing back over and over and over again. First and foremost, Sephiroth is simply a phenomenal villain. His villainous ambitions are vast in scale, his actions are ruinous, destructive, despicable, and truly evil. He is frightening and imposing. At times he feels more like a force of nature than a man. For most of the story he seems unbeatable, his powers are incredible, he slays his enemies effortlessly, and his willpower is so overwhelming that he is able to override our main character's own mind. Sephiroth begins his story as a cold, cool, and aloof master swordsman, but his character undergoes a dramatic transformation when he learns the shocking truth of his own origins. This revelation breaks his mind. And who actually is Sephiroth? What is Sephiroth? Is he a man? Is he a god? Is he a radical scientific experiment gone wrong? Is he an interstellar calamity born of the void? Or is he simply a child desperately trying to follow in his mother's footsteps? A key theme of Final Fantasy VII is identity. This question of how do our characters present themselves to each other, and how does that presentation differ from who they truly are deep down inside? How does their understanding of their own identities change over the course of the story? So many characters in this game turn out to be very different in the end than who they are first presented to be, including Cloud, Aerith, Tifa, Barret, Red 13, Cait Sith, and Sephiroth himself. I plan on posting several more videos examining the story of Final Fantasy VII, and this question of identity is going to keep coming up. In this video, in order to understand the character of Sephiroth, his layered identity, and how he was written, I want to follow him through the entire story, from his explosive introduction to his final climactic boss battle. Okay, so Sephiroth is mentioned several times before he actually appears on screen. For example, in one scene we see a flashback in which a younger version of our main character, Cloud, says that he wants to join Soldier so he can become as strong as Sephiroth. Soldier is the elite military division of Shinra, the dystopian corporate monopoly, which has seized control of nearly the entire world in Final Fantasy VII. Sephiroth is said to have been the most powerful member of Soldier, and this is how his character is first presented to the player, as a great warrior, a powerful swordsman, a war hero, someone who our protagonist aspires to emulate. The developers have stated that some aspects of Sephiroth's character were inspired by the story of the legendary medieval Japanese swordsman Sasaki Kojiro, a warrior who fought a famous duel, but we'll discuss that more later. At the start of the game, people say that Sephiroth is already dead, killed 5 years earlier under uncertain circumstances. For the first act of the game, the villain of the story is the Shinra Electric Power Company, whose ruthless exploitation of the planet's natural resources is killing the planet itself, and whose seizure of the government has created a dystopian society where a single corporation wields total power. For a while, this seems to be a simple story about a band of plucky rebels defying the will of an evil authoritarian regime, a story about the confrontation between greedy corporate bureaucrats and environmental freedom fighters. But then, during one of our heroes' battles against the dastardly power company, a reborn Sephiroth suddenly appears, and the story transforms into something else altogether, a much grander and more epic story about the fate of all life on the planet. Sephiroth's character is central to this transformation. He individually uplifts the story of Final Fantasy VII into something far more complex than the simple good versus evil tale from which it begins. So much of what makes this story great is only possible because of its villain. Sephiroth's character is actually introduced to the audience twice, in two very different ways. First, at the Shinra headquarters building, where we only see the aftermath of his rampage, and then second in Cloud's flashback at Nibelheim, where we actually see him appear on screen. Okay, so let's start with the first. Aerith, a beloved and good-hearted member of our hero's team, is kidnapped by Shinra and locked away in their headquarters, because Aerith, and I am going to be calling her Aerith in all of these videos, anyway, Aerith is the last living descendant of a people called the Cetra, also known as the Ancients, a nomadic race who are able to commune with the planet itself in a very deep and profound way, and who almost entirely died out thousands of years ago for reasons I'll discuss in more detail later. For now, all that matters is that Aerith is their last descendant, and the greedy, heartless executives at Shinra believe they can use her to find a place called the Promised Land, where lie vast quantities of resources for the company to exploit, further enriching itself. Our heroes don't take very kindly to this kidnapping and decide to infiltrate the Shinra HQ to rescue their friend. During this infiltration, we reach Shinra's research department, where Cloud sees something inside a special containment tank. We are shown a single brief flash of a bizarre alien-like creature, which Barrett describes as a freak. But otherwise, no details are given, it remains a mystery. In this brief glimpse, the player might get a hint that this story is going to be about something much grander and much stranger than just Shinra. There is something beyond humanity at work here, a cosmic influence whose motivations and nature are perhaps impossible to comprehend. But we'll dig into that more later. Moving forward, our hero's rescue attempt fails. They are captured by the Turks, powerful Shinra special agents of the company's investigative department, basically deadly secret police who enforce Shinra's authority. The Turks drag Cloud and the rest in front of Mr. Shinra himself, the fat, slimy, greedy, compassionless president and founder of the Shinra Electric Power Company, the man personally responsible for all the terrible things his company has done, the dystopian living conditions, the overexploitation of natural resources, the destruction of the environment, and in essence, because his company has become more powerful than the government itself, he is basically the ruler of the entire world, and what a foul world he has built. The first time you play the game, the developers want you to believe that this guy is the true villain of the story. And in this scene, he does a good job acting the part. He is arrogant, dismissive, cares only for increasing the glory of his corporate kingdom. The lives of people and the natural resources of the planet only matter to him so far as he can use them to increase his own wealth. But these primitive human ambitions will very soon be cast aside. This is going to be a story about cosmic ambitions, and to demonstrate to the player just how trivial Shinra's motivations are, Sephiroth is going to swiftly and easily slay this wannabe villain. Okay, so our heroes are locked in a Shinra prison, and this could have been the end of the story. They have no way of escaping, they have failed in their mission. It appears that the world is doomed to be dominated by Shinra. But then something totally unexpected happens. Cloud wakes up to discover that the door to his cell has been mysteriously left open, and only his cell. It's important to note that none of the other characters have been freed. It seems that someone is trying to help Cloud, but that someone does not care what happens to his friends. When he ventures out into the hall, he finds that all of the Shinra guards have been brutally slaughtered. Cloud and the others follow a trail of blood and carnage through the building. Even the walls have been damaged, cut and slashed by some sort of massive blade. The player should be asking themselves, who could have done this? Who could have so utterly defeated the Shinra private army in its own headquarters, something even our heroes failed to accomplish? And instead of the Shinra soldiers and combat robots from earlier, the player will battle strange creatures in the random encounters here. When the bloody trail leads them through the research department again, they see that someone has violently destroyed the Jenova containment tank and stolen the specimen that was held inside. Cloud eventually reaches the top of the building, the president's office, and the president himself has been murdered, his body impaled on a long silver sword. The ruler of the world is dead. This is amazing. I mean, this is who we thought would be the main villain of the story, and he has been killed completely off-screen, with no fanfare whatsoever, only minutes after his introduction. Cloud immediately identifies the sword as belonging to Sephiroth, meaning that not only is the famous soldier still alive, but that he has betrayed Shinra, his former employer. Palmer, a particularly buffoonish Shinra executive, appears, an eyewitness to Sephiroth's slaughter, and he reveals that Sephiroth's goal was to prevent the company from reaching the Promised Land, which is of course our hero's goal too. For the briefest of moments, it seems as if Sephiroth might actually be a good guy, but Cloud pushes back against this, says that it is not possible, that Sephiroth must be trying to accomplish something else. This first introduction to Sephiroth's character is a masterclass in how to make a villain seem imposing, frightening, and dangerous right from the very start. The game has already spent a lot of time building up the Shinra Electric Power Company as a dangerous villain. They've caused horrific destruction in the city of Midgard, and even defeated Cloud and the others in battle. Shinra already seemed really powerful, but then, out of nowhere, another villain swoops in and easily defeats them. This makes the new villain seem vastly more powerful and more dangerous than he would have otherwise. I adore this introduction because it accomplishes so much without you ever even seeing Sephiroth on screen. You just see the results of his violent rampage, all the death and destruction he has wrought, and it is more than enough. And there's so much mystery here too. It could only have been Sephiroth who freed Cloud from his jail cell, but why? What is his connection with Cloud? And why did he steal Jenova? What is his connection to this strange alien-like creature? And what is his connection to the Cetra and the Promised Land? Why does he attack Shinra? And what are his true goals? After escaping from the Shinra HQ, Cloud and the rest leave the city of Midgard and regroup at a nearby town. There, Cloud tells them what happened to Sephiroth 5 years ago at Nibelheim, which was Cloud and Tifa's hometown. Okay, so Cloud claims to have once been a member of Soldier, the same elite Shinra military organization as Sephiroth. He says that 5 years ago he and Sephiroth were given a mission to travel to Nibelheim and investigate a Mako reactor that was malfunctioning and being attacked by vicious monsters. We see Cloud and Sephiroth riding together in the back of a military transport truck, and this is the first time we ever actually see Sephiroth in the polygonal flesh, so let's discuss his visual design. Sephiroth's designer, Tetsuya Nomura, said in an interview that, "My concept for Sephiroth from the beginning was that everything about him would be kakoi, his battle movements and all his in-game scenes too. My image of the relationship between Cloud and Sephiroth was that of Musashi Miyamoto and Sasaki Kojiro, and I had them in mind when I designed their appearance, as well as their swords. Of course, Cloud is Musashi and Sephiroth is Kojiro. That term Nomura uses, kakoi, is a Japanese word which is usually translated as cool, but can also mean handsome, good-looking, and stylish. And I think you can easily see that in Sephiroth's visual design, even as blurry and blocky as these old polygons are. This guy is supposed to be cool. The audience is supposed to be enamored with him. Just look at his original concept art. The long, flowing silver hair, the stylish black leather coat and boots, that absurdly long sword, his rockin' bod peeking out from under his uniform there at the top. This guy looks like he could be a pop star. This sense of coolness is enhanced by his behavior. During the briefing for this mission, Cloud is behaving in a very uncool way. He's bouncing off the walls, jumping up and down, talking about how excited he is. He is behaving like a child, whereas Sephiroth is cold and aloof, disinterested. He possesses an air of emotional detachment, which is a defining trait for stereotypical fictional coolness. Nomura mentions two famous historical Japanese warriors in that interview, Musashi Miyamoto and Sasaki Kojiro. I've already mentioned Kojiro, but Musashi was Kojiro's lifelong rival, and in the end they fought a famous duel in which Kojiro was killed. But through his prowess in that one incredible battle, he gained an eternal fame despite losing his life. So with these two characters, Nomura was trying to invoke the image of two master warriors, two lifelong rivals, locked in mortal combat. We should also talk a little bit about Sephiroth's name. It was pulled from Judaism, and is related to the sacred tree of life. The name Sephiroth is meant to give a sense of the godly and the mystical, to indicate a relationship with the divine. An appropriate name for a character who will aspire to become a god himself. At one point, the truck is attacked by monsters, and Cloud and Sephiroth go outside to face them. It turns out to be a freaking dragon, and Cloud's attacks barely do any damage. On the other hand, Sephiroth's attacks do thousands of points worth of damage. He slays this dragon in just 2 moves. This guy is really tough, the epitome of the skilled swordsman. Cloud says that he was mesmerized by the way Sephiroth fought. He looked up to Sephiroth. He wanted to be like Sephiroth. And in this short battle, you can easily understand why. Who wouldn't want to be like Sephiroth? When they reach the town itself, Sephiroth asks Cloud what it feels like to be back home. This is not just small talk. Sephiroth is genuinely curious to know what home feels like. He has no home of his own. He says that his mother, who he calls Jenova, died right after he was born, and he does not say anything about his father. He interrupts his own thoughts by bursting out into laughter. Here at the start, his past is a laughing matter to him, a joke. It's not something that matters to Sephiroth. All he cares about is completing the mission in front of him, but that's going to change in a big way really soon. I think this little exchange is important to understanding his early character. Even if he laughs it off here, I do think Sephiroth has some longing for a home and a family. This is someone who has probably never had anyone he could call family. I think it is significant that he will consistently refer to Jenova as his mother, even after discovering what Jenova is, even though she did not actually give birth to him or raise him. He will latch on to that strange creature as a substitute for a real family. It is also interesting that, at this point in the story, it seems as if Sephiroth believes that his mother was human. What we're seeing here is how Sephiroth behaves when he identifies as a human. Cold, cool, aloof, the master swordsman, but his behavior will change dramatically when he begins to identify as something else. And of course, the question of what really defines humanity is another important theme in Final Fantasy VII's story. Is Sephiroth human? For a large portion of the story, it seems as if the answer is no, he is something else. But that answer will be complicated by future revelations in regard to his origins. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In Nibelheim, Sephiroth encourages Cloud to reunite with his family and friends, and I think this is important to his early character too. When he still identifies as human, Sephiroth does possess some small amount of compassion. He bears no ill will whatsoever towards Cloud or any of the townspeople. He wants them to reconnect, to have fun together. He does not participate in that fun himself, but he does not begrudge it of anyone else. The townspeople are excited that the great warrior Sephiroth has arrived. He is famous, he is revered and celebrated, though he does not seem to care one way or the other. It's also interesting to me that he willingly poses for a picture taken by one of the townspeople. Like, villains don't usually stop to pose for photos with their fans, especially a villain who is as evil as Sephiroth turns out to be, who is so derisive towards all human life. It's just more evidence of how radical the transformation his character undergoes really is. From here, Cloud, Sephiroth, Tifa, and a couple Shinra soldiers climb Mount Nibel, the location of the malfunctioning Mako reactor. A rope bridge collapses, sending them all tumbling down into a canyon. After they regroup, they realize that one of the soldiers has gone missing. Sephiroth refuses to search for him and insists that they continue the mission. This reveals a fundamental coldness in Sephiroth's early character. There might be a little compassion in him, but he was never someone who cared very much for the lives of men under his command. There's this moment when they find a Mako spring in a cave. Cloud asks some apparently juvenile questions regarding the nature of magic, and Sephiroth takes on the role of mentor, giving a simple lesson on the history of materia. When Cloud says that magic is too mysterious for him to understand, Sephiroth laughs at his childish reaction. And I don't think this laughter is mean-spirited. I think it's genuine. Sephiroth is remembering something from his past and it makes him laugh. Again, the casual human behavior here isn't what you would expect from the villain he becomes. At this point in the story, he is sane, he is normal. Sephiroth says that someone once told him to never use such unscientific terms as mysterious or magical. That someone is Hojo, the current head of Shinra's research department. Sephiroth describes him as an inexperienced man who inherited the work of a greater scientist, a walking mass of neuroses and psychological complexes. This moment is significant because this is, I think, one of the only times in the entire game when Sephiroth shares a personal memory of Hojo. Eventually, it is going to be revealed that Hojo is Sephiroth's biological father, meaning that Sephiroth did have a family, a human family, though he never knew it. In this dialogue, he is dismissive and condescending towards Hojo, clearly does not think very highly of the man. Anyway, moving on, the party reaches the Mako reactor, and inside they find a chamber utterly unlike anything seen in the interior of any of the other reactors. The other Mako reactors in the game are simply industrial facilities that use Mako to generate electricity, but this one on Mount Nibel seems to have been used for some sort of experiment. The word Jenova is written in bold letters on the wall, and the chamber is filled with strange containment pods. Sephiroth does not display much of a reaction at first. He quickly identifies the source of the malfunction and orders Cloud to conduct a repair. The mission still comes first. He is clearly curious about what's happening inside this chamber and recognizes it as the work of Hojo, though he still says that Hojo is an inferior scientist compared to his predecessor. He encourages Cloud to look inside one of the containment pods, and when Cloud does so, we see an image of a bizarre, deformed humanoid creature. A grotesque life form created from Mako energy, created by Hojo. Sephiroth compares the creature inside to the members of Soldier. He says that members of Soldier are created by infusing the human body with concentrated Mako, but the creatures in those containment pods have been exposed to a far higher concentration than normal. Cloud asks a very innocent question about the difference between Sephiroth and the other soldiers, and Sephiroth completely freaks out. It seems that he realizes for the first time that he actually may have been created by Shinra using a similar process, that he himself is not what he thought he was, that he might not be human at all, instead just another grotesque life form created from Mako and Hojo's twisted experiments. He begins wildly swinging his sword at the containment pods. He says that he always felt different from others, but not like this. He doesn't want to be different in this way. He doesn't want to be the monstrous result of a simple lab experiment. In this scene, I think Sephiroth comes off as a deeply sympathetic character. He has just made a terrible possible discovery about the nature of his own existence. In some ways, Sephiroth is as much a victim of the same corporate greed as everyone else in this story. He is a tool that has been manufactured by a corporation that only cares about increasing its own profits, that does not care for his life at all. It drives Sephiroth to uncover all of his past, to discover the truth of his origins. Sephiroth has experienced a crisis of identity. With this revelation, he can no longer identify as the same person as before. He can no longer be that cool master swordsman we met in the transport truck. Afterwards, Sephiroth refuses to speak to anyone, and he disappears inside the Shinra mansion. The Shinra mansion is a very old and abandoned manor on the outskirts of Nibelheim. Its visual design is meant to resemble a stereotypical haunted house. This design indicates to the audience that this manor is the site of some terrible horror, that something very wrong happened here. The scientists of Shinra used this manor as a base when they were conducting some of their first experiments on Jenova, experimenting with her cells, using them to create new life forms in the Mako reactor chambers. Sephiroth comes here seeking information about his own origins. While looking for the missing Sephiroth, Cloud breaks through a false wall in the manor and then descends down a long, crumbling staircase. At the bottom, he finds Shinra's abandoned secret research lab, where they left hundreds and hundreds of journals and books detailing their experiments and findings. Sephiroth is here too, reading through all that old research. He is reading out loud when Cloud arrives. In one entry he reads, "A seemingly dead organism was found in a 2,000-year-old stratum. Professor Gast named the organism Jenova. Jenova confirmed to be an ancient. Jenova project approved. Mako Reactor 1 approved for use." Sephiroth drops the book, gazes up towards the ceiling, and says, "My mother's name is Jenova. Jenova project. Could this just be a coincidence?" Then he looks down at the floor and says, clearly in a state of personal anguish, "Professor Gast, why didn't you tell me? Why did you die?" He remains locked in the basement for days, voraciously poring through all the research material, reading every single book on the shelves, hundreds of them. Cloud says he behaved as if he was possessed, and in a way this is an accurate statement, except Sephiroth is not being possessed by an evil spirit. Instead, he is being possessed by a new identity, a new understanding of himself, based on what he discovers in Shinra's research files. Again, I think Sephiroth is very sympathetic here. He has been lied to by people he trusts. He doesn't know what is true or false anymore. He doesn't know what is real. The only person who could have provided him with answers, Professor Gast, is long dead, and so he has to piece the truth together on his own, one discovery at a time. Days later, Cloud returns to the underground research lab and discovers a Sephiroth who has completely transformed, essentially a new man. Sephiroth is laughing maniacally, apparently driven mad by what he has read. He calls Cloud a loathsome traitor. He reveals some of what he has learned. He says, "This planet originally belonged to the Cetra. The Cetra were a race of nomads. They would travel, unlock the planet, then move on. At the end of their long, harsh journey, they believed they would find the promised land and supreme happiness. However, some began to dislike traveling. They built dwellings and elected to lead an easier life. They took that which the Cetra and the planet had bestowed and gave back not a whit in return. Those are your ancestors. Long ago, disaster struck the planet. Your ancestors fled in all directions. They survived because they hid. The crisis of the planet was averted because the Cetra sacrificed themselves. After that, your ancestors continued to grow and multiply. Now all that's left of the Cetra are these reports." Cloud asks what any of this has to do with Sephiroth, to which he responds, "Don't you see? The 2,000-year-old ancient named Jenova was found in a layer of ice, which led to the Jenova project. The purpose of the Jenova project was to create humans with the abilities of the ancients, that is, the Cetra. I was the one created. Professor Gast, leader of the Jenova project and genius scientist, created me." Then Sephiroth marches away, declaring that he is going to go meet his mother. This is the information upon which Sephiroth bases his newly reconstructed identity. And that's the fascinating thing about identity in Final Fantasy VII. In this story, your identity is not who you really are. Instead, it is a story you tell yourself about yourself. And it does not have to be a true story. It is possible to build your entire identity upon a foundation of falsehood and misunderstanding. In this scene, Sephiroth is a character who is rewriting his own story. It's a dramatic and epic and wild story about him as the creation of a genius scientist, the only son of a lost race, sole descendant of the former masters of the planet, an honorable and powerful race who were betrayed by the lesser humans, a race who sacrificed themselves to protect the planet, only for that planet to then be ravaged by the greedy humans who had betrayed them. A second betrayal. In this story, Sephiroth is the inheritor of that betrayal, and he intends to avenge it. He is not human. He is Cetra, rightful master of the planet, and someone who has every reason to hate and despise humanity. The only problem with this story is that it is all wrong. He is basing his new identity on Shinra's outdated research notes, and those notes are full of mistakes, half-truths, and factual errors. First and foremost, as we'll discover later, Jenova is not a Cetra. That was a mistaken assumption made by the Shinra researchers who first excavated her body. And if she is not a member of the Cetra, then neither is Sephiroth. Even if the Cetra were betrayed, which they really weren't, he is not an inheritor of that betrayal. It has nothing to do with him. His ancestor, Jenova, did not sacrifice herself to save the planet from a terrible crisis. Jenova was the crisis. He is the descendant of calamity and apocalypse. The Cetra, the people he is currently basing his entire sense of self on, should be his enemies. And Sephiroth was not created by a genius scientist, was not created by Professor Gast, a man he admires. Instead, he is the biological child of Hojo, a man he scorns. I think at least part of the reason why Sephiroth goes insane is because his new identity is haphazardly constructed out of so many broken and mistaken parts. His sense of self is wrong, it contradicts reality, and that is why it is so destructive. Sephiroth is something of a tragic character. Absolutely everything he thinks he knows about the world and himself is wrong. Sephiroth's identity is just a mess. This identity crisis broke his mind, and psychologically he never fully recovers. Moving forward, Cloud follows Sephiroth out of the mansion and finds that Nibelheim is in flames. The townspeople have been brutally slaughtered. Sephiroth is sadistically murdering any human he can find, because he believes he is avenging an ancient betrayal. He believes his ancestors were betrayed by the lazy and greedy humans and so deserve death. Driven by his mistaken identity, Sephiroth's actions become truly evil. He kills without hesitation and without care. He slaughters dozens, if not hundreds, of innocent people for no reason. There is nothing cool or admirable about him anymore. He is a monster who cannot be negotiated with or reasoned with. In many stories, there will come a scene where a villain will reveal who they truly are. They will cast off their mask and reveal the evil within, which was always there lying in wait. There will be a dramatic change in behavior, just like we see with Sephiroth here. An example that I've examined on this channel before would be Odin from God of War Ragnarok, who puts on a mask of being reasonable and amenable at the beginning of the story, but then tears that mask off to reveal a callous and murderous personality underneath later. That is not exactly what is happening with Sephiroth here though. Unlike a villain such as Odin, Sephiroth was not always evil. As we saw earlier, he felt no ill will towards these townspeople. He was willing to pose for pictures with them. It was only with the change in his understanding of self that he became willing to do these terrible things. Cloud pursues Sephiroth all the way back to the Mako reactor, where we find Tifa and her dead father, who is another victim of Sephiroth's rampage. Furious, she grabs his sword and rushes inside, intending to kill her father's murderer. Sephiroth easily overpowers her and she is badly injured. After checking on Tifa, Cloud follows Sephiroth inside Jenova's chamber. Here we see a very strange humanoid device hooked up to the wall. Sephiroth spreads his arms in the air, gazes up at the creature he believes to be his mother, and says, "Mother, Together, let us take back this planet. I have a great idea. We'll head for the Promised Land. Cloud confronts him over the destruction of his hometown, the deaths of his friends and family, and Sephiroth merely laughs in response. He says, "Here they are again, Mother." With her superior abilities and magic, Mother was destined to be the ruler of this planet. But they, those worthless creatures, are stealing the planet from Mother. But now I'm here with you, so do not worry. Then he tears off the humanoid device, and the player is shown their first clear image of Jenova. Jenova's visual design is intended to be utterly alien, unlike anything else found on this planet, a hint as to her true origins. We see a creature with a human face and a vaguely humanoid body, but with blue skin, glowing eyes, and strange growths all over her flesh. Cloud then tries to confront Sephiroth with the sorrow he is spreading, but the villain just laughs again and says, "My sorrow? What do I have to be sorrowful about? I am the chosen one. I have been chosen to be the ruler of this planet. I was given a life in order to take the planet from you stupid fools, to reclaim it for the Cetra. What should I be sad about?" So this is Sephiroth's goal for the rest of the story. He is going to take the planet away from the filthy and selfish humans, because he believes as the child of Jenova, whether she's a Cetra or not, he is the rightful ruler of the planet. He does not have any goal beyond this. It does not appear as if there is anything specific he actually wants to do once he's taken over the planet. He just believes that it is his right to be in charge because it was his mother's right. Not necessarily because she was a Cetra, which she wasn't, but because of her superior abilities and magic. He is revealing a belief in the hierarchy of power here. The powerful deserve to be in control, and because Sephiroth believes himself to be the most powerful being around, obviously he deserves to be in charge. So in this scene, he's not just driven by the ostensibly noble goal of avenging the Cetra, he is also pursuing power simply for power's sake, which is a stereotypical evil villain motivation. I think Sephiroth is trying to follow in the footsteps of his mother, at least as he understands them. Sephiroth is not just basing his identity around being a descendant of the Cetra, he is specifically basing his identity around being the son of Jenova. And in this, a new theme appears. It's not just about identity, it's about the sins of our fathers, this inability to escape from the bounds of our genetic heritage. Moving forward, Cloud's flashback ends there. We don't yet discover what actually happened to Sephiroth 5 years ago, why he disappeared, why he has been dormant for so long. From here, Sephiroth becomes the focus of the entire story. Our heroes embark on a grand adventure, where they cross entire continents and oceans. This vast fantasy landscape full of danger and wonder, where they meet new friends and face off against deadly foes. Our heroes are chasing him across the entire world. At every new location, you can find rumors of a man in a black cloak, who just recently passed through on his way to somewhere else. It always feels as if we are right on his heels. Sephiroth is apparently undertaking a grand adventure of his own, though his goals are not yet clear. Perhaps he is still searching for the Promised Land. For now, I want to focus on just 2 stops of this adventure, Cosmo Canyon and Nibelheim. Okay, so at Cosmo Canyon, Red 13's hometown, we meet Bugenhagen, a wise elder who reveals some interesting details about Red 13's true identity, and also reveals important information concerning the inner workings of the planet. In a long expository cutscene involving a flashy 3D holographic representation of the solar system, Bugenhagen explains that in this setting, when a person dies, not only does their body decompose and return to the soil, but that a person's soul returns to the planet as well, and not just the souls of humans, but the spirits of all living things. All of these souls and spirits join together, roam, converge, divide, forming a swell, a fantastic magical current, rushing within the deep bowels of the planet. This current is known as the Lifestream. The Lifestream is the source of all life on the planet. Whenever a child is born or a new seed sprouts, it is blessed with soul and energy from the Lifestream, and when they die, they return this gift of energy from whence it came. And it's not just the source of human, plant, and animal life, it is also the source of planet life. It could be said that the Lifestream is the collective soul of the living planet itself. This energy is under threat by Shinra, but that's not important right now. What's relevant to Sephiroth is simply the existence of the Lifestream. This is a massive source of power and knowledge, which Sephiroth will try to take possession of. Next, we will travel to Nibelheim, and to Cloud's shock, the town looks as if it was never damaged at all. All evidence of Sephiroth's rampage has vanished. It is as if Cloud's story never actually happened. The townspeople don't even remember Cloud, suggesting that maybe he never actually lived here. Maybe his memories are mistaken. This is the beginning of Cloud's own identity crisis, when his own perception of himself is challenged. And eventually it will lead him to reconstruct his identity in a very similar way to what Sephiroth did. We will discuss this in far more detail in my video essay analyzing Cloud's character, but for now you just need to understand that Cloud and Sephiroth are mirrors to each other. Their characters follow similar patterns and face similar challenges. As I've discussed on this channel many times before, villains often serve as dark reflections of their respective heroes, a darker path not taken. In the dark corners of Nibelheim, our party can find these strange figures wearing black cloaks. They groan and moan and mutter to themselves about Sephiroth and the mansion, and something about a reunion. Each cloaked figure has been tattooed with a number. Red 13 also carries a number tattoo, given to him during his time as Hojo's research specimen, which suggests that these cloaked figures are a result of Hojo's experiments. A lot of them also give Cloud gifts, useful items and consumables. I think these gifts are intended to suggest a connection between Cloud and the cloaked figures, but at this point in the story, the player will have no idea who or what these cloaked figures are. Cloud enters the old mansion again, goes back down into the secret research lab in the basement, and finds Sephiroth waiting there. This is actually the first time we ever see Sephiroth outside of a flashback. The first time he appears in person in the present day. He asks Cloud if he's going to participate in the reunion. Of course, Cloud has no clue what he's talking about. And then Sephiroth says, Jenova will be at the reunion. Jenova will join the reunion, becoming a calamity from the skies. Again, Cloud is totally confused. Sephiroth seems disappointed and says that Cloud does not yet have the right to participate. He then reveals his next destination and encourages Cloud to follow him, and then flies away. The most interesting thing about this encounter is that Sephiroth shows absolutely no hostility towards Cloud whatsoever. He does not treat Cloud as either an enemy or a threat. In fact, he's actually kind of friendly. This is really unusual behavior for a villain, especially one as murderous and despicable as Sephiroth. The writers do such a fantastic job of building up this mystery around Sephiroth. The first time you play, his actions simply will not make any sense to you at all. Why does his personality make these dramatic swings between violent rampage and total calm? Why is he being so friendly with Cloud, someone who should be his sworn enemy? These mysteries are a very compelling driving force in the story. It does seem from his dialogue that Sephiroth, during the 5-year gap since that flashback, learned of Jenova's true nature, that he knows now that she is not a Cetra, that she was actually born from the sky, which might explain why he's no longer hostile towards humanity. He no longer views them as traitors. They do not matter to him or his plans anymore. The Cetra don't seem to matter anymore either. From here on out, all that matters to him is Jenova, his mother, restoring her and following in her footsteps. Unfortunately, learning this truth has not healed his madness. He is still totally crazy, as we'll see later. So why not? If it was the identity crisis and the mistaken belief that he was a Cetra that caused his insanity in the first place, then shouldn't learning the truth about Jenova have cured that insanity? I think the problem is that Sephiroth still does not know the full truth, and in fact never will. But we'll discuss that more later. One last note before we leave Nibelheim. In a secret chamber in the mansion's basement, you can find Vincent, a former Turk transformed into some kind of vampire-like creature, I guess. He was in love with someone named Lucretia, a member of Shinra who apparently betrayed him. Very few details of her character are revealed in this original game, but Lucretia was Sephiroth's biological human mother, something he never learns. Anyway, moving on, the party hears a rumor that Sephiroth is searching for something called black materia, and in pursuit of this, they eventually travel to the Temple of the Ancients, a crumbling and forgotten jungle temple built by the Cetra to safeguard the black materia. Inside, a well of ancient souls shows Cloud and Aerith a vision, and in this vision we finally learn Sephiroth's new goal. He is not searching for the Promised Land anymore. He does not care about avenging the Cetra anymore. His plans have completely changed. Okay, so in this vision, Sephiroth confronts a member of the Turks inside the temple. He says he is going to do something that the fools at Shinra never even considered in their short-sighted, trivial schemes. He says, all the spirit energy of this planet, all its wisdom, all its knowledge, I will meld with it all. I will become one with it, and it will become one with me. Then he viciously stabs the Turk through the chest, declaring, only death awaits you all, but do not fear, for it is through death that a new spirit energy is born. Soon you will live again as part of me. The energy that makes up each of our characters' souls is the same energy that makes up the Lifestream, which is of course the exact same energy that makes up Sephiroth's soul as well. Normally, when a person dies and their soul leaves its body and returns to the Lifestream, their consciousness, their sense of self, their individual identity is lost. They become one with the whole, and eventually are reborn as someone or something else. But Sephiroth believes he can merge his soul with the Lifestream while he is still alive. Instead of having his consciousness overwritten by the neutrality of the Lifestream, he believes that his consciousness can overwrite the entire Lifestream. In essence, the Lifestream will become him, will think his thoughts and feel his feelings alone. By the strength of his individual will, he wants to become the soul of the planet, the source of all life. This is why Sephiroth's perception of death has changed. He honestly does not believe he is killing any of these people. He is just returning their energy to the Lifestream, where it will eventually become a part of his own soul. Their essence will become a part of him, and will live on inside him for all eternity. After Sephiroth explains his plan, the Turk asks, can you actually do that? And no one in the game ever answers this question. Is it actually possible for anyone to overwrite the Lifestream with their own consciousness? Just keep that question in mind as we go through the next scene. Okay, so Cloud and Aerith reach the room with the murals. Sephiroth is flying all over the place, laughing and ranting and muttering like a crazed psychopath, demonstrating that he is still, in fact, completely insane. Regardless, Aerith confronts him and asks, how do you intend to become one with the planet? And Sephiroth says, it's simple. Once the planet is hurt, it gathers spirit energy to heal the injury. The amount of energy depends on the size of the injury. What would happen if there was an injury that threatened the very life of the planet? Think how much energy would be gathered. And at the center of that injury will be me. All that boundless energy will be mine. By merging with all the energy of the planet, I will become a new life form, a new existence. Melding with the planet, I will cease to exist as I am now, only to be reborn as a god to rule over every soul. Okay, so this is all fine and dandy. Sephiroth will use the black materia to summon a meteor, which will strike the planet, causing a massive injury, which will cause the planet to gather a proportionally massive amount of energy. And then Sephiroth will sit in the middle of the crater, soaking up all that energy like a big fat baby in a bathtub. But remember that question, can you do that? The rest of the game is totally focused on preventing Sephiroth from using the black materia, from carrying out his plan in the first place, so his theory is never put to the test. It is possible that the Earth would not have even survived the meteor strike, in which case Sephiroth would be destroyed too. At minimum, Sephiroth's plan is incredibly risky, and the chances of success seem very uncertain. You would have to be crazy to try something like this. And Sephiroth is crazy. His mind was shattered by that identity crisis he experienced back in Nibelheim 5 years ago, and it has never properly healed. Anyway, moving on. Immediately after this scene, Cloud begins acting very strangely. He laughs and mumbles in the exact same way that Sephiroth did before, but is quickly brought back to his senses by his friends. Through a complicated series of events, our heroes manage to acquire the black materia, and then something completely crazy happens. Sephiroth appears and he tells Cloud to wake up. Cloud collapses on the ground, and when he stands back up, he hands the black materia over to Sephiroth. And then, even worse, he begins attacking Aerith. And this is what is truly horrific to me. On this channel, in the past, I have discussed villains who are able to turn someone against themselves, to cause characters to lose control of their own bodies and minds. It's one of the most terrifying abilities a villain can possess, and this is a particularly upsetting example. As blocky and blurry and low resolution as this scene is, I find it to be really unnerving. The writers have done such a good job at developing Aerith's character. She is so kind and so good and so supportive, particularly towards Cloud. For her to become the target of this violence is awful. It would be one thing if she was being attacked by Sephiroth or some monster, but to be viciously attacked by one of her closest friends, that is horrifying. This is the moment when Sephiroth becomes a truly great villain in my eyes. The stuff with his shifting identity is interesting, the scale and insanity of his ambitions are compelling, but it is in this scene, when he turns these friends against each other, that he becomes truly dangerous and frightening. Okay, so what is happening here? How is Sephiroth able to do this? Why is Cloud obeying his commands? I used to think his ability to control Cloud had something to do with Jenova. As we'll learn later, both of their bodies have been injected with Jenova cells, and that is the connection between them. The reason why Sephiroth freed Cloud from his cell in the Shinra HQ. Why Sephiroth is not hostile towards Cloud. So I used to assume that Sephiroth was somehow using his own Jenova cells to manipulate those inside of Cloud to make him do these things, but I no longer believe this to be the case. Nowadays, I think it's just a matter of pure willpower. Sephiroth's will is so strong, and Cloud's is so weak, that he is able to simply override Cloud's will to make him do whatever he wants. We will discuss the reasons for Cloud's weakness in my video on his character, but for now all that matters is that Sephiroth seems to have a deep understanding of Cloud's psychological condition and is able to take advantage of its vulnerabilities. Later on, Cloud and the rest of his party follow Aerith to the City of the Ancients, where she went alone to do something to save the planet. When Cloud and Aerith finally reunite, Sephiroth tries to control him again. He tries to force Cloud to kill Aerith, but this time, with a little help from his friends, Cloud manages to resist. What follows is one of the most famous scenes in video game history. Out of nowhere, without any hint as to what's about to happen, Sephiroth leaps from the sky, blade in hand, and stabs Aerith in the back, impaling her on his sword, killing her instantly. She slumps to the ground, dead. I often think of Final Fantasy VII as being a story divided into 3 distinct parts. The first part is dominated by the Shinra Electric Power Company. Then, as we've already discussed, Sephiroth appears and the story suddenly transforms. It becomes this much grander fantasy adventure epic. But then Sephiroth murders Aerith and the story transforms again. It becomes a much more personal and intimate story about questions like, what really matters? What is true inner strength? Aerith's death is totally shocking and unexpected. Her character is so important to the story. Her status as the last descendant of the Ancients, her unique powers and perspective. These are things the villains might want to possess, but never to destroy. Shinra has been trying to capture Aerith for the entire game, but they would never kill her. She is too valuable, she is too special. And then, as if to demonstrate just how little respect he has for the value of life, Sephiroth casts her aside like it's nothing, like he's just taking out the trash. It's horrifying. It is deeply upsetting. But as unexpected as this is, Sephiroth is falling into a typical villainous pattern here. It's actually very common for villains to kill a beloved character. It is a common narrative tool with a clear purpose. This makes the villain hateable, despicable, detested. It shows the audience just how evil they truly are, how necessary their destruction is. It's a compelling motivation for both the characters and the audience to want to destroy that villain. After he kills Aerith, Sephiroth says, "Do not be concerned. Soon this girl too will become a part of the planet's flow of energy." He's speaking here of his belief that death isn't really death. Her soul is not lost, it will return to the Lifestream, and if Sephiroth's plans are successful, it will become a part of him as well. But Cloud interrupts his monologue. He says that the cycle of nature and Sephiroth's grand schemes don't matter. What matters was Aerith, not her soul, not her spirit energy, but her personality, her individuality, the things that made her unique, the things that made her different than anyone else. Those are lost. The things that made Aerith, Aerith are gone forever. She is gone forever. Sephiroth's belief that the death of an individual doesn't matter just because their energy is still around is total bullshit. It's his inability to recognize this that makes Sephiroth a truly despicable and evil villain. He simply does not understand the tremendous value of an individual life, nor the terrible rending pain that loss and grief produce. This is what makes Sephiroth inhuman, not his Jenova cells, not the fact that he is the product of a science experiment, but his lack of emotion, his lack of grief, and his lack of care. Sephiroth describes the murder of Aerith as a mere diversion, a distraction from his greater plans, which is a disgustingly dismissive and careless way to describe the loss of a life. Of course, he did have a reason for killing Aerith. It wasn't just a random act of violence. That orb she drops is the white materia, the counterpart to the black materia that Sephiroth was seeking. Where the black materia wields magic of great destruction, its counterpart wields magic of great protection. She was casting a spell here which would protect the planet from anything that might cause it harm, which would of course ruin Sephiroth's insane plans. In some ways, what we're seeing in this scene is actually the continuation of an ancient battle between the Cetra and Jenova, but we'll discuss that more in a bit. From here, our heroes follow Sephiroth into the north, the site of a very old crater, where the planet was struck by a meteor long ago. The planet is still attempting to heal this wound, and for that reason there is a great deal of magical energy gathered here. Magical energy Sephiroth intends to absorb in order to become powerful enough to summon the meteor. On the way there, we make a stop at the Icicle Inn, a secluded and snowy village in the mountains. This is one of the most important locations in the entire game, because this is where the history of Jenova is finally revealed. Alright, very quickly let's sum up what we've learned about Jenova so far. Jenova was a creature whose body was discovered frozen in a 2,000-year-old ice stratum by Shinra researchers. At first, Shinra believed she was an ancient, a member of the Cetra, but Sephiroth later describes her as a calamity from the sky instead. In experiments using her cells, Shinra's researchers created Sephiroth, and so he refers to her as his mother. Her cells appear to be responsible for his tremendous powers. The player will have seen multiple versions of Jenova over the course of the game, in both cutscenes and in battles. She is shown to be a bizarre, alien-like creature who wields great magical power, but her nature and origins are still unclear. Now, in the Icicle Inn, the player can find an abandoned research lab which contains videotapes of interviews between Professor Gast, the famous Shinra scientist and predecessor to Hojo, and a woman named Ilfana, who is Aerith's mother and a Cetra who still remembers her people's history. In one of these interviews, titled The First Crisis of the Planet, she discusses Jenova. She says that the planet was once wounded by something that fell from the sky, landing here in the far north. Thousands of Cetra gathered and attempted to mitigate the injury, but the wound was very deep. Living conditions became difficult, and so the Cetra began to depart. And then something appeared at the Great Crater, a creature, a being, a life form whose like had never been seen before. This creature had fallen from the heavens astride a meteor, and when it struck the Earth's surface, it created a massive crater, a wound so deep it still has not been healed. The Cetra called this creature the Calamity from the Sky. It used illusions to deceive the Cetra, tricked them using the faces and memories of their dead loved ones. Using these illusions, it got close enough to infect them with a virus. Those infected by the virus went insane and turned into monsters. The creature traveled across the world, deceiving and then destroying every clan of Cetra it encountered. In the next video, Ilfana confirms that the creature Shinra excavated and named Jenova was the Calamity from the Sky. The few surviving Cetra managed to defeat and imprison Jenova deep in the ice, where she rested for thousands of years before being freed by the Shinra scientists, who had no understanding of the danger they had stumbled upon. That is everything we ever learn about Jenova in the original game, which is not very much. Unknowability is at the center of Jenova's character. It's not just a mystery that hasn't been solved. Many aspects of its character are simply unknowable, and that is a deliberate choice by the writers. Jenova is an example of cosmic horror, a genre of horror which I've discussed in detail on this channel before. Unknowability is a key element of cosmic horror, intended to simulate our inherent fear of the unknown. We don't know where Jenova came from. We don't know whether she was born naturally or manufactured artificially. We don't know if there is an entire race of Jenovas out there roaming the stars, traveling from planet to planet, wreaking destruction wherever they go, or if she is the only one of her kind. We don't know what her true purpose is. Why is she infecting Cetra with this virus? Could this be how her species reproduces? She infects other creatures with her own DNA in order to transform them into new versions of herself? Or maybe Jenova is not as intelligent as she seems. Maybe she's operating purely on instinct. Maybe Jenova herself is the virus, a virus which infects and destroys intelligent life wherever she encounters it. Or maybe Jenova was going to do the exact same thing that Sephiroth is doing. First, she wounded the planet with a meteor strike, and then, once the threat of the Cetra was removed, she was going to attempt to hijack the planet's Lifestream to become a god. We simply do not know the truth, and not knowing is the point. Sephiroth is the child of a calamity. He is the genetic spawn of a creature whose nature and origins we simply do not understand. He is a mutant, part human and part something else altogether. Moving on, our heroes journey across the ice fields and frozen mountaintops until they reach the northern crater. There they encounter the Black Cloaks again, who appear to be gathering here with the purpose of dying. They die of exhaustion on the trail and throw themselves off cliffs, groaning and moaning and muttering about Sephiroth. This is the reunion. Each of these cloaked figures was injected with Jenova cells by Hojo. They are called clones of Sephiroth, but that name is a bit deceptive. Usually we think of clones as being genetically identical copies, but that's not what these are. Instead, these are attempts by Hojo to reproduce the results of his Sephiroth experiment, using the exact same means to create a new creature with the same powers as Sephiroth. Which of course begs the question, why was Hojo trying to make a new Sephiroth? Well, we'll see the answer to that question soon enough. The clones have been bound to Sephiroth's will in the same way Cloud was earlier. Sephiroth has lured them here so that their genetic material, their Jenova cells, can be returned to Jenova herself, so she can be restored to her former power. Near the center of the crater, Cloud confronts Sephiroth. Sephiroth says his current body has reached the end of its usefulness, and then he transforms into another Jenova construct. What's being revealed here is that the Sephiroth we've been following all this time wasn't really Sephiroth at all. It was a piece of Jenova's body that had taken on his form. As Ilfana discussed earlier, Jenova has the ability to mimic the appearance of others. The entire purpose of this fake Sephiroth was to deliver all of the Jenova cells and the black materia to the northern crater. by following fake Sephiroth, by retrieving the black materia for him. Cloud and the rest have actually been doing exactly what Jenova and Sephiroth wanted them to do all along. This is another sort of classic villainous twist. The villain is so powerful, so intelligent, that she has already planned 10 steps ahead. Even when you think you're foiling the villain's plans, you're actually just furthering them. When Cloud approaches the center of the crater, he is shown a vision of Nibelheim, created by Sephiroth. In this vision, it is strongly suggested that Cloud is not who he thinks he is. He may not be Cloud at all. We'll discuss this in far more detail in my video on Cloud, but for now what you need to understand is that Sephiroth is attempting to cause Cloud to have an identity crisis to break his will. This is really fascinating, because what Sephiroth is doing is wielding identity as a weapon, which I don't think I've ever seen a villain do before. I've seen villains wield physical weapons, physical strength, magical strength. I've seen them wield lies and manipulations, but never identity. It's not just that Sephiroth is trying to cause Cloud to doubt himself. All villains do that. Sephiroth is taking it a step further. He is trying to cause Cloud to doubt his innermost self, everything he knows about himself, which is even more fascinating because, of course, as we already saw, it was an identity crisis that broke Sephiroth's mind in the first place. Knowledge of self drove him insane, and now he's trying to do the same thing to his enemy. And it works. He breaks Cloud's will. Cloud doesn't know who he is anymore, and that leaves him in a weakened state. In this state, he is easily overpowered by Sephiroth's strength of will. Sephiroth dominates him, forces him to do whatever he wants. This is where Hojo actually reveals that Cloud is just another clone of Sephiroth, a failed attempt to reproduce that great warrior. Cloud is the same as the Black Cloaks, experiments injected with Jenova cells, summoned to the north by their master to reunite with the original. The real Sephiroth was here in the northern crater all along, his body being restored in the massive quantities of energy here. For the second time, Cloud hands over the black materia, and Sephiroth summons his meteor to wound the world. The villain has won. For the final act of the game, that meteor looms in the sky, a constant reminder of the planet's approaching doom. Soon, everyone will die. And for the final act of the game, Sephiroth remains locked away in the northern crater, no longer interacting with our main cast. He has assumed the traditional video game villain's role, the big bad final boss waiting for our heroes at the end of the final dungeon. But his story is not over yet. There are still 2 more revelations we need to discuss before we reach the final boss fight. The first takes place inside of Cloud's own memories. There's this whole elaborate sequence in which Cloud explores his memories and reconstructs his identity. In this sequence, Cloud finally remembers that 5 years ago, back in Nibelheim, when he and Sephiroth confronted each other in the Mako reactor at the top of Mount Nibel, Cloud, despite being far weaker than his opponent, managed to severely wound Sephiroth. Afterwards, Sephiroth disappeared in the north, but was presumed dead by Shinra. This is why Hojo was injecting people with Jenova cells in attempts to create a new Sephiroth, which then set the entire story of Final Fantasy VII into motion. Up to this point, Sephiroth has seemed completely unstoppable, invincible, like no one can beat him, and especially not Cloud, who has been broken at every encounter. But this memory demonstrates that Sephiroth is fallible. He has been defeated before, which means he can be defeated again. But something even more important happens in this sequence. Okay, so Cloud's mind was completely shattered by his identity crisis, just like Sephiroth's was back in Nibelheim. However, by accepting the full truth of his past and his identity, Cloud is healed. He regains control of himself. This suggests that it's possible that Sephiroth could have been healed too, if he had just learned and accepted the full truth of his past, which is related to the second revelation I want to discuss. This one takes place right before the battle with Hojo, who is doing everything he can to support Sephiroth's apocalyptic plans, even though it will mean his own death. The reason for this is that Hojo is Sephiroth's biological father, and like any good father, he wants to support his son. Or, like any good scientist, he just wants to see his experiment through to its conclusion. Hojo impregnated Lucretia and then injected the fetus with Jenova cells. Therefore, Sephiroth is very literally Hojo's child. But why does this matter? Who cares who his biological father is? Well, as we've discussed, Sephiroth has constructed his identity on the belief that he is the child of Jenova and the creation of the genius Professor Gast. If he knew who his father really was, if he knew that he was not just created in a lab, but born of a woman, a human woman, that he is no more the child of Jenova than anyone else who was injected with Jenova cells, including both Cloud and Hojo himself, that would have forced Sephiroth to construct a different identity. Sephiroth is not a Cetra and he is not an ancient. He is not a god. He is not an interstellar nightmare born of the void. He is not even really the child of Jenova. He is human, and his inability to incorporate his humanity into his identity is possibly the true cause of his madness. This is only a theory, of course, but thematically it fits the narrative. With complete and correct knowledge of self, Sephiroth may have never become a villain at all. And then again, maybe not. We'll never know. Anyway, in the end, our heroes return to the northern crater and confront Sephiroth one final time. Sephiroth no longer has the appearance of a human man. He has transformed into this magnificent winged being, with a divine halo hovering over his head, a visual design meant to indicate that he is indeed ascending to godhood. Before I end this video, I want to discuss two final questions. First, why doesn't Sephiroth speak in this final battle? He does not say a single word anywhere in this fight. Even as he dies, he does so silently. He has no final words, which is very unusual. Villains, especially ones who have as much character and personality as Sephiroth does, do not die silently. They usually mouth off. "You're nothing but a worm to me. You're a butthole's butthole. You'll never defeat me." And this is something I'm really curious about with the remake trilogy, because they're definitely not going to let him be silent in the final battle of the third remake game. That would defy current narrative conventions in a way that the Final Fantasy series is not interested in doing anymore. They're going to give him something to say, and I'm very curious to see what that's going to be. But let's imagine that this is an intentional choice by the writers. Well, the purpose of dialogue is usually to reveal something to the audience. Whether it's something about the character, about the plot, about the themes, dialogue should never be included just for the sake of having characters flap their gums. It needs to be adding something to the narrative. But at this point in the story, perhaps there's really nothing left to reveal about Sephiroth's character or the story's themes. Maybe the audience already knows everything there is to know here. Maybe there's just nothing left to say. The battle itself communicates enough on its own. The challenge of this final fight, the spectacle, the grandeur. The player will feel the tension. They will see the incredible scale of Sephiroth's attacks, especially this one, in which he summons a comet from outside the galaxy, which shatters Pluto, destroys Saturn's rings, punches a hole through Jupiter, slams into the sun, which then expands, destroying both Mercury and Venus too. This single attack just wrecked our entire solar system. Who cares what he has to say? My second and final question is, why are Sephiroth and Jenova fighting together? This final battle has at least two phases, usually three depending on certain circumstances, but that is not important here. The first battle is always against something called Jenova synthesis, which I'm assuming is the reconstituted body of Jenova herself, restored to something close to her original power. Jenova presumably had her own plans when she first invaded this planet, but now she seems to have set those aside in order to support Sephiroth's plan instead. Why is she doing this? Is it simply that because Sephiroth contains her own genetic material, she views him as an extension of herself? Or does she think of him as a son in the same way he thinks of her as a mother? Or could it be that Sephiroth's willpower is so great that he has psychologically overpowered Jenova in the same way he overpowered Cloud and the other clones, that he has bent her to his will? Or could it be that she wants the same thing he wants, to wound the planet and hijack the Lifestream? Or maybe she simply wishes to destroy the planet and all life along with it. Or maybe it's something else entirely. Whatever the case, I find the alliance between these two to be really interesting. Jenova is a being of incredible power, obscure origins, and very uncertain motivations. There is so much mystery surrounding her. So what does this alliance with Sephiroth, a mutant hybrid between a human and her own DNA, reveal about her character? In the end, it doesn't really matter. She made a poor choice of allies. She dies along with Sephiroth. In its final moments, this becomes a simple story of good versus evil again, and at least this time, the forces of good do prevail. There is a reason why Sephiroth is one of the most famous villains in the history of video games. The scale of his ambitions, his incredible powers, his violent insanity, how close he comes to reaching true godhood, the despicable and evil things he does, all that is compelling enough. But the questions of identity surrounding his character are what's really fascinating. The way his mind is broken by knowledge of self. The way he constructs a new identity out of limited, mistaken, and false information. The way he wields identity as a deadly weapon in his confrontations with Cloud. And finally, his connections with this strange being called Jenova adds a whole other dimension to his character. It adds this tinge of cosmic horror, of unknowability, of interstellar mystery. The developers and writers of the remake will face a difficult challenge in reshaping this character to fit the new expanded storyline, without losing the things that made him so captivating to begin with. For my next video, I will be doing a similar analysis of how Cloud's character was written and developed in the original game, with a focus on how he too constructs and reconstructs his identity over the course of the story, so please look forward to that.